Let's get corrupted. What is going on, everybody? It's your boy Joe with Meteoric Serpents coming back at you for another episode of the Colubrid Corruption Podcast. Guys, it's great to be back after a couple week short hiatus. I don't even want to call it a hiatus, just some scheduling issues and conflicts, and it's all good. But yeah, super excited to be bringing this back to you guys. And it's the week before Colubrid Fest, which we're about to talk about it. I'm about to get into that a little bit, but hope you're all doing super well. Thanks to everyone who's here. But yeah, so just to go through, the usual intro stuff. As you guys know, I do have Meteoric Serpents t-shirts available, and everyone going to Colubrid Fest is going to be able to see the brand new Colubrid Corruption t-shirts. I am bringing an exclusive number of those in pretty much all sizes from small to XXL. So if you guys are there, you're going to have an opportunity to get one. I'm super excited about those. Cool to get out some merch to the listeners, the people, and I can't thank you all enough for listening to the show. So yeah, that's number one. And two, as you guys know, all of our social medias are down below. You could go find us just searching Meteoric Serpents pretty much everywhere. And on Morph Market, we do have some animals available, a good amount. I actually sold a few. I sold one of the scaleless Texas rats today, which is cool. That's one less animal I have for Colubrid Fest, but and not too mad to see the little guy go. It seemed like someone who was pretty excited about the Texas Rat Project, which is always awesome. We had a cool conversation, so hell yeah. You can also catch this podcast besides on YouTube. You can catch this on all the podcasting platforms, all the major ones like Apple Podcasts, Spotify, and I know some other ones as well. And yeah, and then you guys should all make sure you're going and supporting USARK Florida. Those are the organizations that fight for our rights to keep our reptiles. If you guys know, I haven't been on in the last couple of weeks. I don't know if you saw that USARK alert about the whole reptiles getting added to the quote-unquote animals on, I forget if it's like the USDA or something to that extent, which could have some significant effects of, agents coming through to certain businesses and making sure everything is kept up to check. Not that, I've heard both sides of it, and sure, it sounds like a good thing, but, they could also make recommendations for keepers and breeders that are unrealistic to the species. They could lump a bunch of things together and give, uninformed care guides to things. I mean, there's so many species out there that we take care of. So this could definitely have some negative side effects. So you should all go read up on that. And make sure you're going and supporting those organizations for sure. And then, guys, like I mentioned, Colubrid Fest, going to be super exciting. It's this week, finally. And I can confirm, which I think I said on the last one, I am attending, I am speaking, and I am vending. I will have the Meteoric Serpents booth/table up and ready to go. I will have some select Texas rats available, some on display as well. And t-shirts, Meteoric Serpents t-shirts, and the new Colubrid Corruption t-shirts, which is super exciting. Again, big shout out to Paul from For Real 3D. He's one of the homies. He hooked it up, getting those shirts from him. So I'm super excited. And after Colubrid Fest, I'll make those available if people want them. I'll make sure you guys see them. I'll be wearing one at the show. So yeah. Also, guys, Patreon. If you go to the first link in the description, you will see the link to the Meteoric Serpents Patreon. Really, it's a way for people to get together, people who like colubrids, to shoot the stuff about these snakes, have a lot of fun, have some questions and conversations and all that good stuff. It's also a way for you to say, thanks for the show. If you enjoy watching here, I have some different membership tiers, so that's cool. Definitely go check that out. And then last but not least, before we get into tonight's guest, we have hashtag Colubrid Corruption of the Week. Let's share our screen here. This one is coming from Jared Carmichael at Jared's Snake Room. This is a Gonyosoma oxycephalum. Super cool individual, great shot. Jared always has great shots on his Instagram. And I saw that he tagged this on here a couple weeks ago, and I was like, damn, that's a badass animal. I'm not sure if that's like one of the silver animals, because I kind of see, if you guys see my cursor, see, some of the green on the head there, but super cool. Gonyosoma in general are just some of my favorite snakes. They're so majestic and cool looking, and you guys all know that. So yeah, that's hashtag Colubrid corruption of the week. Always some great submission, guys. Keep them coming. Like I've said, once a week, someone gets picked for that. But without further ado, we do have our guest here. And if you guys saw the Instagram post this morning and read the description of today's episode, we're going to be talking about some unique species tonight, ones that I think should be getting more love in the hobby. And I've been seeing more and more of them, and I'm hoping, our guest is doing a great part in adding them to herpetoculture. So I think this is super cool. But tonight's guest is none other than Christen from Stygian Exotics. I hope I pronounced that right. But yeah, so super cool. So everyone, please welcome her on. We have Christen. What's going on?
Not much, just hanging out with you.
Hell yeah. Did I pronounce the name correctly? Is it Stygian?
Yeah.
Okay, perfect.
Yeah.
But yeah, what's going on? How are you doing tonight?
I'm tired. I'm hanging in there.
Yeah, I feel that. It's always busy. So I totally get the grind, and you have a ton of animals, I know, so I know it's got to be a busy job.
It is, and then I have 2 sick kids right now, so it's like,
oh man,
makes it harder.
Not great.
No, not great.
All right, cool. So yeah, before we kind of get into everything, I really want to know your backstory, how you got into reptiles and how that kind of led into where you are today with your collection.
I got into reptiles by working at a mom and pop store ages ago, and we did like almost all the exotics we bred in house. So very like, it went from basically never having exposure to reptiles to like, bam, like, knee deep in breeding monitors, breeding hedgehogs, breeding snakes, doing all this stuff in house. We had green tree monitors, we had frilled dragons, we had a colony of back then it was like he would keep like a colony of bearded dragons together and things like that, that like isn't husbandry standard anymore. But I've been, God, that was like 24 years ago, back when I was in that, and we would breed Argus monitors, and so there was a lot of just like different moving parts to that, and it kind of we bred and raised our own parrots and stuff, and so there was like a very sudden exposure to that kind of that world or whatever. And as it happened,
did you start at that store for any specific, because if you've never had exposure before, was there a specific animal that you were keen to, and then you kind of learned everything?
Honestly, I don't know why I started working there. That's a great question. I can't remember what the motivation was, because really at the time I went from owning like a couple of cats and a couple dogs to like working in an exotic pet store, so I don't know if it was just that it was local and I was like, hey, this sounds cool. But that's where my road took me. And, I made some amazing friends there, and we had some amazing times there, and it kind of totally, just like head to toe soaked me in like that exotic world or whatever. And it all went downhill from there. So ever since then I've been, into reptiles. And I've, come and gone through a couple stages. Like my husband and I used to keep like monitors and Gila monsters and things like that. And then we had kids and things changed, and we lost the larger space we had. So we had to kind of downsize and change direction. And now mainly snakes. That's basically what I have going on. So it's definitely evolved over time.
Yeah, for sure. No, that's super cool, because I have a similar like reptile coming up story to you, because I don't know if you've listened, but I also worked at an exotic pet store, but I had a snake first. And we used to go to
Did
the
you?
store. I had a snake, I had fish. And then eventually when I was like 14 or 15, they let me start working there. So, but yeah,
That's
that's when I first got my hands-on experience. But it's super cool that you went into it not knowing like a
Yeah,
thing, and
it
then
was
it
crazy.
became your thing.
Yeah. I mean, how weird is that? I don't know. I
Yeah.
remember the first time reaching my hand into a baby Argus monitor enclosure and being like, I got to get this water dish out of here. Am I going to get
Yep.
nailed? And and then you just got to go for it. It's
Yep.
wild going from that like very naive kind of stance to like being all in. So
Yeah. No, that's super cool. And then so coming out of that, and then you started transitioning into the snakes and stuff. So where did your direction kind of start, snakes
well,
wise?
my first snake was an emerald tree boa. That was actually my first reptile ever, period. So I took in an emerald tree boa, and then from there I got like I think my next one was like a BCI, and then I just kind of sand boas became a big thing for me. I don't remember how I really got into them. It's so weird because a lot of that stuff seems so distant and blurred now. It's like all a blur. But I got
Right.
really into sand boas at that time, and those have been kind of my consistent throughout my hobby. I've always kind of had sand boas to one effect or another, and then um, yeah, I think that it's interesting because we had for a long time we did have the monitors and stuff, and I thought that was really where I was like at home and really wanted to work with monitors, and as we lost that ability to have that space required for monitors, it kind of was like, okay, well, what else can I do? And as my
Right.
interests kind of changed and I started reading more information and kind of talking to more people, and I think going to I started going to Tinley shows, and that for
Okay.
me really changed my perspective and like what was interesting to me, because your exposure in a small midwestern town versus like what you might see at Tinley is super different. And I
Yeah.
think that really shaped a lot of my like interests going forward too. So
Okay. Cool. Awesome. So as we get into the Colubrid collection of, your side, you have a couple, I'll say genuses, because I know you have multiple species within that. A couple genuses that are kind of just unique and a little, I'd say they're hard to come by in the hobby. What made you go the direction of Coloegnathus and Zamensis?
trying to think of what really spurred that interest. I really for a long time was my love of like the Coelognathus was started by radiated rat snakes. And
Okay.
I remember when we started seeing like albino ones in the pet trade, and just kind of seeing those, and they were so in my eyes, very magical, just beautiful. Like they had
Yeah.
amazing patterning, and their behavior was fascinating. And it's always been one of those species. It had been for a long time that I was like, oh, maybe someday, and I think from that, in researching them, I kind of accidentally fell into other species in that in that realm too, and
Right.
kind of coming across like the trinket snakes, and you know kind of like, why aren't they more popular? Why don't you ever see them around? And there was a lot of like, for a while when I was just starting out researching about them, there's a lot of like negative media kind of associated with them. Like you see a lot of like all the wild photography that you see of them is them displaying and angry and
Right.
mouth gaping and kind of like scaring someone off, and it's weird because like they really don't have that attitude in captivity. Like I have my trinket snakes. I have I'm not sure how many. I have like 9 or 10 or something, and
Okay.
I very rarely ever see that behavior. But it was just so interesting to me. I find them fascinating in general as like a whole. So getting my hands on them felt like this, like, oh, how exciting, because I don't see them anywhere. No one's ever got them on expo tables. I don't even really see them at
Right.
Tinley. They kind of disappeared from the hobby for a while. And I've talked to other people where like I do remember a time when trinkets were more prevalent in like the US hobby, like in the 90s and stuff, and then they just kind of disappeared. Um,
Right.
And I don't know if that's, I mean, I'm sure that's a multifaceted reasoning. They're just a brown snake, for all intents and purposes. There's not a lot of morphs like with the ball pythons. And I think a lot of
Yeah.
that kind of stuff really closed the doors on a lot of colubrids and the popularity of a lot of colubrids in general.
Yeah.
You know, there's only so much room and there's only so many, spaces for that kind of stuff. And so when you start to see that fade away, to me, it's almost more interesting to be like, why is this species not being kept and bred and offered?
Yeah.
So I think that, with that being said, that's probably partly why I'm interested in the Zamenis too, just because there's this like gap where there don't seem to be very many of them in the US. Whereas, over in Europe, they're quite common. There's
Right.
quite a few breeders working with the Asclepians and, the Persian rats and the leopard rats that I have. Sorry, my brain sometimes I'm like, what else do I have? So I think there's some of that for me. It's just the pull of like, okay, not everybody has these in their house. Not everybody is also working with these. What can I do with them?
Right.
And I think there's value to bringing them back to the hobby in that respect too.
100%. 100%. Yeah. And it's super cool. Now the Zamenis, those are, I'd say, like newer to me. I feel like I've always heard, as I started getting into more of the Asian stuff, I've always heard of like the trinket snakes, but I never really paid any mind to them, not for any reason at all.
Yeah.
But recently I picked up, well, a couple years ago, I got the Asian rat snake book, or the Chinese rat snake book by Dr. Messenger. And then I recently got which one is it? Not the monograph, the Klaus's, the collection of papers.
Oh,
and
yeah.
I really started flipping through those pages, and I got to the Coelognathus section, and I was like, holy crap, there's all these snakes that, one, I've never seen, and two, there's these morphs out there that look really cool, and they're just not in the US hobby.
Right.
It was showing like they were all, I believe they were all in Asia and Europe and stuff like that, all these different morphs. And I forget which species off the top of my head, but I was like, that's really cool. And I'm like, it would be interesting, to find the keeper in the US who's kind of preserving this. And I've mentioned it a couple times after hearing some people talk. I'd love to be that guy that has one of those species that day. It's like, I'm one of the only people of in the US who has them.
Right.
And it seems like you're kind of doing that with the stuff you're keeping.
Yeah, for sure. I feel like that. And I think there's absolutely value to that, because like I have been really fortunate to a couple of times have met the right people, talked to the right people, and made some imports happen that like, I may not have imagined would have happened before that. Like with my Montaigne trinkets that I have, to my knowledge, and if someone out there knows anything differently, feel free to correct me, but I am the only person that has them in the States, and I'm one of the only people that has them in the world, outside of India. So because they cannot be exported and they are more difficult to breed. So things like that I think are really valuable in that sense too, to like, they're here, but this may be the only group we have left that's in captivity outside of India.
100%.
So I'm trying to make that happen. And
if I was reading your Instagram post correctly, that's a subspecies off of Helena.
Yeah, there's 3 recognized species. So, but yeah, they are the largest one of the 3, and they've been one that I've just kind of like for years have been drooling over photos of them on Google and like, oh, they're so beautiful. Why can't we get something like this over here? And these are 2nd generation captive bred from Klaus Dieterschultz's line. So awesome. I don't know if I'm pronouncing that right, but they are more particular about breeding. So they need more like seasonal change to stimulate breeding. Whereas like the Helena, the common trinket, the smaller version, they just basically go when you put them together. You put them together and they're like, hey, and they get to it. There's like no prerequisite at all. But like with the Montaignes, for sure, it's been a struggle to get them going. So.
Got it. Cool. And when it comes to those guys, you're keeping Helena, and I forgot the subspecies
That's
of
okay.
the montane.
Monticolorus.
Okay. So you're
Monticolorus.
keeping those two. Any others?
I wish.
Okay.
There's another one, the Nigri angularis.
Okay.
And they have like an arrow shape on their head. They're
Interesting.
absolutely beautiful animals, but I really don't think there are any of those in captivity that I'm aware of.
Okay.
So I would
Okay.
love to get my hands on those though. So if anyone has the hookup, let me know.
And what do you think? Like, are they just particular? Are they hard to get started on diet? Are they hard to breed? Like, what do you think is keeping these animals from being in captivity and being captive bred?
Well, part of the problem is not being able to export from India, where a lot of these
Okay.
are. And so what we have is kind of what we have. You know, the common trinkets have kind of a wider range. They're more like you can get them in Pakistan and things like that. And so they're Pakistan, southern India, Sri Lanka. So they're a little bit more widespread.
Okay.
And I think just enough of them are in the hobby over in the UK that's not going anywhere.
Got it.
Whereas like the Monticolorus are only really found in the Western Ghats in India. So it's a smaller range. It's a little bit more niche maybe. And like the only scientific paper I have managed to find on them, like care and breeding and stuff, was it's like a page and a half. It's got almost no information.
Okay.
So a lot of this has been like just piecing together like climate and the care from this. And I actually just made contact with the guy who wrote that paper. So I'm hoping to collaborate with him on his experience keeping
Awesome.
them too, because they did actually manage to get them to breed and produce for them. But
Oh
they
wow.
also live in the climate where they're collected, and they kept my understanding is that they kept a window open for most of the seasonal changes. And when they would
Interesting.
have like torrential rainstorms would come in and actually kind of come into their cages too. So there's more like, you know, they're in Michigan here, so it's a completely different climate, and I have to create these seasonal differences. Oh yeah,
Gotcha.
that's one of my boys.
Yeah. Just showing off. I mean,
Yeah,
in my opinion, there's some really cool color that comes through. Again, I just
yeah,
don't quite understand why they're a little underrated in the hobby.
they really are, and they make excellent captives. They are
Okay.
so easy to keep. They are very forgiving of husbandry mistakes. They're not super sensitive like some of those snakes where it's like, oh man, if you have the temperature off they're going to drop dead. These aren't really
Okay.
like that. They eat great. I've never had an issue with any of them, and the ones that of the Helena that I've hatched, they eat right out of the shell basically. So
Oh
they
wow.
come
Okay.
out and they shed and they are ready to go. Like they take frozen thawed, no question. I don't even have to do live feeders with them. So
Very cool.
it's very cool. It'll be interesting to see how the Monticolorus are comparatively, but my understanding is that they were also super easy to start. So I'm not super worried about
Okay.
that. But
Awesome.
and it's so weird because they are just they're easy to handle. It's not like you have to like work to tame them down. They don't come out nasty like that. They come right out of the shell, and you can basically open palm, hold them on your hand,
Yeah.
and they just kind of like they're like, hey, you know, they hang out and they're not really nippy. I think I've only ever been bit once in the time of keeping them, and that was a feeding mistake. You know, he grabbed my finger instead of the mouse, and that's it. Like they're not aggressive or weird.
Gotcha.
They're not extra smelly. They don't musk. They don't spray urine. So I don't know. I can't give you a good answer on why they are not more popular.
Cool. All right. So I really wanted to kind of dive in for people who are curious and interested in keeping this species. I kind of want to run through the basics. What's your general husbandry style for both of those subspecies? If you want to run through both of them, just general like racks, caging, temperatures, substrate, things like that, all that stuff.
Sure. So I offer them all humid hides because they do go through periods of like having a lot of rainfall. They really need that humidity boost. So I always provide that just as an in case, you know, the cage is too dry or whatever. And they utilize those hide boxes a lot. I will say, I think that the Monticolorus, I find them in their hide boxes or in their humid hide boxes more often than like the Helena. They definitely, they're an interesting species because they like that warmer, like 84 degrees. They don't really, some people have it in their heads that they really like a cooler temperature, and that's not really accurate. They do actually need like an 84. And so whenever I've told people that I incubate the eggs at like 84, they're like, "Oh, are you sure? You know, that sounds too hot?" But no, it's what they do. That's where they lay their eggs in the cages too, is right at like 84 when I temp gun it. So that's where I purposely keep their egg boxes. But I use a mixture of I tend to mix like the breeder block, the ReptiChip breeder block. I'll mix that with their microtrip product, which is like a finer coconut. It's not like the powdery stuff. It's like it's just
like a smaller blend. Little piece.
Smaller chunks.
Yeah, I use a cocoa product as well for all my stuff. Yeah.
So I use that, and then I also mix in sphagnum moss.
Okay.
Excuse me, and I do that because it creates kind of it's easier for them to burrow into it when it's like looser like that mixed up. And so they really seem to appreciate that. And I kind of keep it deep, like a couple inches or whatever. And so sometimes they'll kind of burrow, but they seem to really appreciate that option. And they do the best on it that I found. I've seen people in the past keeping them on like aspen and stuff. And I just, most of my animals, I think now are on like a ReptiChip mix. I think
it's the best type of product. I use it across everything. You know, I have ball pythons. I have, different types of colubrids, and none of them seem to have any problems with that type of substrate. I use all, I give a humid hide with sphagnum is essentially what I do. So
yeah, it's just I like that it doesn't really mold as quickly as some of the other substrates do. And I've had my moments where I'm like, oh, that was too wet or whatever, and you scoop areas out or whatever, but for the most part, like it just is so multi-purpose, and I can use it with my Woma pythons, and I can use it with my emerald tree boas, and it can serve these different uses for me without me having to have 6 different types of substrate in the house.
Exactly. That's why I like it. I just think it's super versatile. It works for everything.
Yeah. And like the microchip is great for my babies. Anything I'm raising up, my holdbacks and stuff, they all really love it because they can burrow into it. Yeah. That's my choice.
Awesome. Yeah, sorry, go ahead. Were you about to say something?
I was just going to say the trinket snakes appreciate, it's interesting because they appreciate their secrecy and their ability to get into a hide box where you can't see them or disturb them. And they do like to sometimes, like my Monticolorus in particular, like to eat in their hide box. So they need to have that sense of security. That's something that I have found that's important with them. Or they do tend to stress out. So if you're going to do like a terrarium style setup, you really need to focus on like they have multiple hides and they have escape routes and stuff. So they don't feel like cornered, that has been my experience with them. And when they feel comfortable like that, they come out more, and they're more likely to come to the front and kind of check you out and see what you're doing. And they're just very pleasant, interesting, interactive snakes to keep. They will climb, so they will utilize some height and stuff if you give them like branches to climb. But they do spend most of their time kind of terrestrial, on the floor. So the climbing is more like they'll do it and they'll look for food up there, but they don't tend to hang out up there as much.
Okay. Got it. Interesting. Cool. And then what about diet when it comes to these guys? You doing anything special besides your standard rodents?
I rotate with quail. Quail and chicken chicks, whatever I have that's the right size. I think it's mostly the quail I'm using with those guys. Nice. So I do the quail and the mice and the rats. Some of them turn their noses up at the rats. It just kind of depends. Different ones have different tastes and stuff.
Okay.
But the montanes are a little pickier. They really like their mice the best. They don't really tend to be as crazy about the birds. But like the Helena will pretty much eat whatever I put in front of their faces.
Got it.
But I really like to do a varied diet anyway. I think that's important in our captive snakes, especially in these these ones that are out there in the wild eating like a varied diet. I don't know if I see a benefit really, you know. I don't know if there's a way to really prove that or not, but they eat it. They do great. I have a ton of eggs I've had this year, so
Yeah.
I don't know.
No, I mean, I'm with you. I kind of roll the same thing. I switch up between mice and quail, and all my colubrids tend to like both. So,
Yeah, yeah. It's rare when I'll find truly some that are just like they just absolutely stub their nose or snub their nose at like a quail or whatever, you know.
right.
But yeah, I like to do that a lot. I do that with my womas too. My womas are one of the things that like in captivity, womas are like, especially in the US, grossly fed the wrong diet.
Really?
Yes, big time. So that's something that I focus on a lot is diet.
Cool. Yeah, I mean, I think it's important. And yeah, I mean, like, we don't think about it sometimes, but like, you know, even I think about it for these Texas rat snakes. You read anywhere, and sorry, I always go back to the snakes I have just because it
It's
makes it
okay.
easier. But like, you read everywhere, that, you know, they're nest raiders. They'll climb in the trees.
Yeah,
They'll get birds, and it's like, well, why are we feeding them mice all the time? So
right.
this quail, you know, they absolutely pound quail. They love it.
Yeah,
I haven't had one refuse quail. I even give like my yearling some budding quail and stuff. And but yeah, I mean, they just all like it. And I'm like, why wouldn't I do this if they're gonna do it in the wild, you know?
right. Yeah, absolutely. I agree with you. I think it's something that a lot of people just like they just crank out the like mouse, 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 rat, rat, rat forever, and it's just not a question.
Yeah.
And I just think we're kind of doing a disservice on that a little bit. So,
Yeah. The birds are also a leaner meal too. That
mhm.
it's a lot less fatty than, you
Yeah,
know, these rodents. So that's also a positive.
yep, yeah. Especially like I hate to go back to it, but the Womo pythons. There's like a there have been some studies that have come about womas that were fed rat only diets and all the fatty tumors they have and how much it
Okay.
shortens their lifespan and their reproductive capabilities. And there's just stuff like that in the hobby where I feel like if it doesn't fit into the box of like just thriving on this one prey item, people kind of lose interest or people don't focus on it and try to do just the rodents or whatever.
Got it. Yeah. I gotcha. Cool. And then let's go into some of the breeding. So what do you or what have you done for the Helena to get them going? And then, you know, that kind of leads into establishing babies, which is my next kind of thing here. So if you want to kind of go through that whole thing.
Honestly, they are very easy. You have to make sure that your female is truly a good weight to do it because they will lay clutch after clutch after clutch.
Okay.
They tend to lay like I think 4 to 6 clutches in a year is average, but
Oh,
there
wow.
is on record as many as 11 clutches in 1 year for a female. And yeah, it's a lot. It's a lot of eggs, and they tend to lay about 4 to 6 at a time is the kind of average. In like my
Well, what's their
female,
gestation if they're going 11 in a year?
right, it's very quick because like when I put my pairs together, basically I leave them together, and it's like 30 to 60 days. I'll start seeing like she'll go into shed or whatever. Right around 60 days is when I get eggs generally.
Okay.
So I put them together and almost to the mark. It's like 60 days. I have
Wow.
eggs. So I generally pull the male out after like 4 to 5 weeks of being paired, maybe even
Okay.
because they literally go to work immediately when you put them together. You can see him chasing her around and it's done. Um, and so the problem is that like it's this weird line where like you feed them to get their weight back on, but you're feeding them and she's like, oh, I've got the goods to do it again. And
Yep.
she'll lay more eggs, you know? So it's this weird line because you don't want to encourage her to keep laying.
Yeah.
And I have heard in the past that people have lost their females before because of that, because they just laid themselves to death.
Okay.
So she's at clutch number 4 right now. So I
Wow.
have 2 clutches in the incubator. I have one of
Okay.
her clutches is due to hatch in like 2 weeks, and then not even 2 weeks, and then the other one is like 5 or 6 weeks or so. I don't remember what time. It's just kind of crazy how much they really will just lay and lay and lay like that. So
and that's off of one pairing, like one.
Yeah.
Okay.
One introduction. And it's interesting because it was weird. Her second clutch was all slugs. It was like soft, weird water balloons. It was very strange. And then the third and fourth have been perfect clutches again. So cool. I don't know what happened with that second one there. But if she lays another couple clutches, my plan is to cool her a little bit and try to get her to kind of like stop,
chill,
chill, rest for a while. You don't need to keep doing this. We're good. But yeah, that's the one I would say, like, the one drawback to them. You don't really have to do anything to like seasonally prepare them. You don't really have to do cooler temperatures or anything like that. It's just getting her to stop afterward. Really, that's what. So that'll be interesting for me. But she's been amazing. Like, they bounce back so quickly too. You feed them a couple meals and it's like, oh, you look completely normal again. And then bam, you've got eggs again. So
got it. No, that's cool.
Yeah. And then, so starting them is really super easy. My first clutch I hatched, one of the babies escaped out of my, what are they called? Those breeder boxes, or the incubation boxes that are like super expensive. Do you know what I'm talking about?
The sim containers?
Yeah. There was like a crack in the side, not a crack, but like in the lid. And it just slipped out because they're super tiny. They come out at like 5 grams.
Oh, wow.
And got out and escaped. And I was like, oh my God, oh no. I didn't know that was going to happen. Obviously I didn't know that was going to happen, but there was a hole in my incubator in the top, and she went up the cord through the hole, drops down onto the floor, and left the incubator completely because I tore that thing apart. I had a screwdriver and I was like, I'm going to find this thing. I took the entire thing apart. She was just gone. And then that night, we found her sitting by the front door, just on the floor, like, hey, what's going on? And she was displaying, like she was all stressed out or whatever. But it's like, oh my God, thank God we found her. But now I know, like, they are really, really good escape artists. And they hatch so much smaller than I think I was even prepared for.
Yeah.
And when they hatched like that, I was like, oh man, these are going to be a pain to start because they're so tiny. But they just sucked those frozen thawed pinkies down right at 7 or 8 days. I offered, like, it was no big deal at all. I didn't need to do any scenting. I didn't need to do any live pinkies. They were just ready to go. And their feeding responses are just amazing. They do that like really good coil where they just grab it and it's like they fight with it and roll around and stuff. They're just fantastic feeders, and they gain weight very quickly in that first year. And I really just think that they are designed to just breed, like they want to get to that breeding size quickly. So they're definitely a colubrid that like they grow as you feed them for sure.
Okay.
Yeah, I haven't had any issues with them.
Cool. And how many years have you been producing them? Because I know obviously you produced them this year.
I did.
A good amount. Yeah.
This is my first year producing them.
Oh, first year. Okay.
Yeah.
Awesome.
Yep. So
I'm sure that has to feel good, especially with, again, like a unique species.
Right. I was totally prepared to have problems. And like, I had read some accounts of like, oh, they didn't do well and blah, blah, blah. And I really think a lot of that comes down to husbandry, in my opinion. A lot of this comes down to like, if you stress them out super bad, they're not going to eat for you. They're not going to do well. And it's the same kind of mentality and mindset I take towards like my Solomon Island boas, who are just absolutely the tiniest snakes you've ever seen be born. They need that privacy to start, that comfortable space that's dark and quiet. And I think the trinket snakes are the same way. I know I've mentioned a couple of times they really value that ability to have privacy. And I definitely think that is very key to starting them when they're little like that. So, because they're just so small.
Yeah. Definitely. And I do want to go back to one thing, because you had mentioned you'll introduce that male, and you had mentioned like the 4 to 5 weeks. So you'll leave them cohabbed like straight for, a good month or so, and then separate and then
Yeah.
That's it for the year, pretty much.
Pretty much, yeah.
Okay.
That's all they really need, and they seem to store it and just keep going off of it. It's crazy because I was like, where are these eggs still coming from, lady? But they get the job done. They're very prolific.
Yeah.
So, and
Gotcha.
that male, he knows exactly what he's doing in there. You put him in there, and there's no like, oh, what are we doing here? He just gets right down to business. First time ever being introduced to a female, and no problems.
Yeah.
So.
Gotcha. Now, where is, I guess, the differentiation now? Do you have the Montecularis like up to breeding size? Or are you still kind of raising them, or like, what have you kind of figured out there?
So they were hatched in 2019.
Okay.
So they are mature enough to breed. They are big enough to breed. Just nailing down what they need. And I've only had them in my possession for maybe like a year and a half.
Got it.
So I did try. I don't remember if I don't think I tried last year. I think I just started for the first time this year, but I've tried pairing them a couple times without any success so far. And then I have tried to create like a rainy season. Sorry, I'm so tired. I'm just like really struggling.
No, okay.
So I've been trying to like stimulate more of like a rainy season, and I currently have my trio all together. And before I was just trying to target the genetics of the two that I liked the best. So I put the pair together that I wanted to breed. That didn't seem to be working. So I put the third animal in with them, and immediately there was like a lot of activity and tail rattling and a lot of stuff that like I hadn't really seen before introducing the third one like that. Whereas before I put them in and they just kind of like hunkered down in a hide and sat there, and I didn't, maybe they were doing something in secret, but I don't know. But introducing that third male and giving them like a heavy rain basically has spiking the humidity big time basically is what I'm doing. So we will see if that gets me the effort or the outcome that I'm looking for. Like I said, I am now starting to talk to the guy that wrote that paper I was telling you about, the like page and a half paper. So he was like, oh yeah, we'll get him breeding. We'll get this done. It's no problem. So I still haven't followed up with him yet. It's just been a chaotic week, but I'm really hoping that he has like some valuable input for me. And, because, obviously with that paper being so skint, it's like, it's hard because there's really just not many accounts of it. And I've scoured the internet looking for other people who have had any accounts of breeding them in captivity, and it's just there's just nothing out there.
Got it.
So we'll see if I get results. If I get eggs from them, everyone will know it.
Okay.
I will be celebrating.
Yeah, that'll be awesome for sure.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. And they were kind of expensive to import. I'm not gonna lie.
I'm sure.
So I'm like, come on, guys, you gotta help me out.
Yeah.
But we'll see. I've got my fingers
crossed. That's a tough thing, but hey, look, if you're able to crack that code, I mean, that'll be pretty fantastic for that species in the U.S. hobby, because that you're ground zero. So
right, and I really just don't think we'll ever see them again. The fact that I got my hands on them at all was like, it was just so wild to me, because I'd been for so long, like, I'll never see these in person. I'll never even have them. Like that never even crossed my mind that like I would get the chance to have them. So just everything just fell in line for me be able to pick them up, and they got transported to me, to him, and then to me. And so yeah, it's definitely been like a blessing for sure.
Yeah. That's awesome. Cool. Now, did I kind of miss anything on that, on your Coelognathus that you want to hit on before we move on?
I don't think so. I think we mostly covered everything.
Cool. Now I kind of want to do the same thing for all the Zamenis species that you have. Now you said you had 3, so it's the Persian rat snakes, the I can never pronounce that word.
It's okay. The Asclepian.
I always say Asclepian. Okay.
Yeah.
There we go. In my head, I've always pronounced it wrong, and I'm not even going to say what my wrong version was. And you said the leopard rat snakes?
Yeah.
Okay. I don't think I even saw those on your page, so I wasn't expecting that, so that's cool.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah. Now, all those guys, well, obviously, besides it being called Persia, they're kind of in that like European rat snake family, kind of ones we don't, again, see that all that often.
Yeah.
So, yeah, if you want to kind of talk about those guys a little bit.
Yeah. I got into them because I have there's a guy here in Michigan that breeds them, the Asclepians, and it was like we became friends, and he's this older gentleman who doesn't really have any social media presence. Like he's on Facebook but kind of quietly, and he doesn't really like his name out there too much. But he breeds them, and I picked up some from him, excuse me, about 3 I don't remember, 3 years ago or something. And but he breeds those every year. He has his own line that he has from Germany, and from there it just kind of became like, you know, these are really interesting, and then you kind of bump into the other species when you're doing research and stuff. Right. The next ones I picked up were the Persicus. I got a pair of melanistic Persicus, which were also imported from somewhere in Europe. I can't remember now where it was. I have it all written down. I have like spreadsheets and stuff to keep track of all this, but I couldn't tell you off the top of my head. But those guys I got, and those are growing really well. And then the Situla is one of those, like the leopard ones. I've always really like, they're beautiful snakes. I just didn't really have access to them. And so I've just started keeping the Situla. My Situla are all very young still. I have like the normal patterned one, the red, you know, the normal phase, red and gold. And then I have 4 of the black phase ones. And then I have 2 striped ones.
Interesting.
So
I don't think I've seen that black phase that you're talking about.
They're very rare. So there's only 3 guys, I think, in Europe that have them. They come from Montenegro, which I might be mispronouncing that.
No, but that's right.
Is it okay?
Yeah.
And so they're only really found there. My understanding is like one was collected. This guy had them and started breeding with some normals, and then they collected another specimen, and so they were able to do some outcrossing. And so there's only like the 3 guys, I think, that have them and are actually having like breeding sized animals from those lines that they're working with. I think there's 1 or 2 other guys that might have them in the States now. I don't want to name drop anyone without knowing for sure. That's not my business. But I think there's 1 or 2 other guys who just had them imported, I think, recently or last year as well. But yeah, they're one of those ones that's just like, they're harder to find. I don't think anyone in the US has like adult melanistic Persian rats. So it's all an arms race, I guess, at this point to see who gets there first. But they're another species that's just like, they should be more popular. They're really beautiful. They don't get super big. They're not nasty or anything. They're not one of those species that musks all over the place when you handle them when they're young. So it's one of those ones where it's like, again, it's like, what's holding them back? Why are these so rare still?
Hold on. I'm pulling this up for the people to see.
Yeah, I haven't even really shared my black ones, my black Situla on Instagram yet.
Okay. Yeah, this is one of the Persian ones. And then I did actually find the picture of the leopard, which I think I just kind of breezed past accidentally, is this guy.
It's okay. And they're just so beautiful. Like the red eyes like that. I think they're fascinating.
Yeah. Oh, it's super cool.
She's kind of a butthole because she will only eat live for me.
Okay.
That's okay. One of my Persian rats will only take live too, which is super annoying. But I'm hoping she switches over. It's weird because like I feel like rat snakes are usually pretty easy to switch over, but there's always got to be one of them in your group, you know?
Right.
And
yeah.
That's one of my Asclepians. I have 3 or 4 different bloodlines of Asclepians right now.
Okay. Very nice. Yeah, I know my buddy got he got a pair of these guys, and I could definitely see like they're interesting. Like, yes, the color is kind of low key, but these kind of blue specks in the scale are super interesting to me.
Well, it's cool too because as they mature, they get this like very beautiful olive green belly. It's
Okay.
really hard to show it on photos just because I don't think the color gets captured quite right. But they have just like, oh, that's one of my older ones too.
Yeah.
You can almost kind of see it right there, like along the edges of her body. I'm trying to point like you guys can see what I'm pointing at. But they have this just beautiful olive belly.
Well, I
Their
could
tail
even
gets
see
super
this
black.
almost looks
Yeah.
olivey.
And they're just so, it's like an understated beauty. That's a younger one I have. And I think oh yeah, these are all pictures of like most of my animals. Some of those are
Gotcha.
het for melanistic. I have one full melanistic, two het for melanistic. So yeah, that one. Um,
Gotcha.
I think they are very cool behavior wise. They are inquisitive and curious, and they kind of wait for food. They're kind of always looking. Um,
Okay.
they are a little on the flighty side when they're young like this, but they chill out, pretty quickly, especially if you're handling them. When I go to get them out, a lot of times they'll turn and like hightail it the other direction. But you just kind of scoop them up anyway, and then they just kind of
Yeah.
like they'll kind of climb through your fingers and stuff. But after a couple minutes, they kind of calm down. And
Yeah.
for sure, like the older they get, the more they chill out as well. They can be a little nippy when they're young. I've definitely
Okay.
been nailed a couple. Oh, there's a good picture of like the belly.
Yeah.
Um,
It's cool.
but they're not mean. And like I said, all that stuff kind of goes away as they age and they get more comfortable with
Right.
you. So
I think that's how most rat snakes are, honestly, is like
yeah,
they're gonna be assholes as babies, but they're just being defensive.
right. They're just
That's what I
scared.
try to tell people
Yeah,
is, they're defensive, not aggressive.
right, right.
That's
They don't want
usually
they don't want to be eaten,
exactly.
right? But it's interesting because like I feel like the Situla and the Persicus aren't as bitey. They're more flighty. Like the Asclepians definitely are more gonna like I don't want to say like stand their ground, but they're more likely to be like grab and then run or whatever. Like a bite on the way out the door, Um,
Right.
very spirited animals, I will say. But
Yeah.
they're excellent feeders. They all feed really great for me. They all take frozen thawed. All the Asclepians do. Um,
Awesome.
they do go through periods of like the males especially will slow down feeding through the winter and sometimes stop entirely just seasonally, especially if your house gets kind of cooler. Like I don't have a closed door reptile room, so my room does kind of get cooler in the winter, and so I'll see
Okay.
that like slow down from them, and that's totally normal. And then yeah, you do have to brumate them to breed, not like the trinkets.
Okay. Got it. And just general like care, husbandry and stuff, do you keep all three of the species like similarly, or are there differences and nuances, or
Um, I offer mine all kind of a varied gradient of temperature. So I like to give them a
okay.
hot spot of like 84 degrees, and then they can all escape it and get down to like, I think 70 degrees is probably the coolest I give them. And they really do make use of both areas. Some people are like, there are a lot of different mindsets about it, like, keep them cool and they do fine or whatever. And, but I have seen them utilize both areas in the cage. They'll just kind of they change it up as they need it or as their ages change. I've noticed they'll hang out in
Okay.
different spots. Like my adult female spends most of her time on the cool end. It's just where she likes to hang out. But the babies will change their areas they're hanging out. And I give them a
Yeah.
lot of like I really try to focus on like security again with them. I give them a lot of like fluffy moss to hide in, and then they utilize that a lot. I think that really helps with their behaviors too, their attitudes.
Got it.
But for the most part, I try to offer the same things to all my snakes. So even if a snake comes from like a drier climate, I'm still offering a humid hide so they can regulate
Right.
themselves. If they need that, they can go in there.
Yeah.
And I try to be in tune with that stuff too. Like I'm in there checking, are you about to shed? I'll bump the humidity. I'll do this or that. And if something's not working, like I'm not afraid to experiment with that too. But they're all relatively, I mean, there's such a similar, They come from like a very widespread area, I feel like, but they keep very similarly. Um,
Right.
it's not like a huge difference. Like none of them need 95 or anything crazy like that. So
Yeah. Okay. Cool. Um, and then now you have not bred any of the Zamenis
not yet, not yet.
quite yet. Okay.
This year, hopefully. So this will
Okay.
be my
Cool.
first year trying.
Awesome. No, that I mean, it's always
Yeah,
fun
it's
to work with new stuff.
right, and it's a process. You have to raise them up for 3 or 4 years, before you get them to breeding size. So this will be my new experience is getting those breeding, and I'm going to be picking up one of those fancy Wilbanks coolers because
Okay.
I really want to have something that I can trust to be consistent, and to
Yeah.
be pumping air in there and not have to worry about it. I've had some negative experiences in the past with like trying to do a homemade thing or trying to repurpose a wine cooler, just because like you don't get the airflow really so much that you want, and so having something that's like built for this for brumating reptiles, I think will be nice, to give me some of
Yeah.
that peace of mind. So we'll see how that goes. Hopefully it'll go great. So I think they're
Definitely.
both animals are more than ready to go. So
Yeah, I've seen the Wilbanks, and I'm seeing a lot of ball python breeders use it.
are you
I haven't seen a lot of colubrid breeders, and
okay?
maybe I'm totally missing it. I could be wrong, but I have not seen a lot of colubrid breeders use the cooling function, and I'm very curious to
Me
use it
too.
myself for
Yeah.
brumation. I'd love to try it out. And basically that's your whole colubrid incubator essentially,
Right.
because
Right.
you cool everything at the same time and then you're breeding everything at the same time. And
That's my hope.
most colubrids kind of have a similar temperature range you could go to depending on the species, but
Yeah.
um
And I'm only
yes.
really going to be doing the Zamenis in my cooler. It's not like I have like a bunch of different colubrids that will need different temps and stuff. So my plan is to try to do them all in the same thing, and then like
Right.
one and done it. And then that would be my colubrid incubator when they all come out and they're all ready to go. Because my other incubator is at a different temperature, because I have different stuff
Yeah.
going on. I can't
Yeah.
put them all in the same thing. And that's always my biggest fear, that I don't have clutches of different temperatures going on. So like I have a backup incubator if I need that. And I try to
Right.
stagger my seasons out and what I'm breeding. But I think having those Wilbanks incubator / brumator things will be like a. I wish I could get feedback from someone who has used it that way as like a brumation tool.
Yeah,
For
I
me,
don't know
that
of
would change.
anyone quite yet. I don't know
Right.
anyone personally, at least. I haven't seen anyone use it. I'd definitely like to hear it though, as
I
well.
would too. I would love to hear feedback if anyone out there has any feedback on them, because I don't really have anywhere. So this has been something that's on my mind too. Is I don't really have anywhere that's cool enough that doesn't get too cold that I can kind of trust it not to get below a certain point.
Yeah.
Because my house, like I have areas that get colder, but then it'll like drop too low, and I don't want to play that game.
Yep.
I've heard other people tell me these horrible stories about like, they did this for years in their garage in a corner, and just this one year they had a cold snap and it killed half their collection or whatever. And it's like,
Yeah.
I don't want to be that story.
Yeah.
So I'm hoping to be able to pick one up if at Tinley, because
Okay.
if you prepay for them, they'll bring them so you can get around the shipping cost.
Yeah.
So
That's a
it's
big factor.
yeah, it's like $400 or $500 to ship them.
Yep.
So I don't know. We'll see.
Yeah. But no, if and when you get that, I'm definitely curious to hear your experience with it on that cooling function.
Absolutely, yeah. I'll definitely be willing to talk about it. My thing always has been like, share as much info as you can about this stuff because it helps everybody.
Yeah.
It doesn't help anybody to hide your information or to hide the secret to breeding something or whatever. So yeah.
100%. Yeah, I mean, even I could say my cooling process, I've talked about it before. My cooling process the last couple of years, and granted, I've only cooled Texas rats, but it's sticking them up in my bedroom closet, and I'm in Florida. So granted, I really don't have, and like I keep everything in my garage pretty much at ambient. So it is a big enough difference where I guess they've felt it, and I've had breeding success, but I know they're also the Texas rats are also animals that people get away with not brumating. So it's probably not a huge deal anyway, but eventually when I'm working with species that do need to be cooled significantly, I'm gonna need a real tool for it.
Yeah, absolutely. I wish I had like a basement or something, but I really just don't. So
yeah,
we'll see.
Yeah, definitely. All right, cool. And then I mean, just for those guys, the Zamenis species, how do you feel about their representation in the hobby? Because I feel like I've been seeing a little bit more Asclepians besides yours. I've seen a couple more people produce them, so they're a little more popular. The leopards, I'd say, are more rare, and I have not seen much of the Persians. So
yeah, the Persians are very there are really only like a couple people in the U.S. keeping them at the moment. Again, I'm not really sure why that is. If it's just that they weren't interesting enough for a long time, or what the case is. There's definitely been like a revitalization, I think, of colubrid interest in general the last like couple of years. People are starting to turn away from the more commonly kept species and kind of finding the more unusual stuff, and kind of I think I've seen that anyway, like an evolution of even people just diversifying. But with the with the Persicus, like I only really know of a couple other people even keeping them in the States. So they're definitely still on the rare end. I know that there have been more imported lately. So hopefully that will change in the next couple of years as they get more widespread. I hope there's more melanistics and stuff out there so I can get, trade bloodlines and stuff. Cause I really only have the one pair. And I would love to get more. It just hasn't happened yet. And that's always my thing is like, I don't want to like inbreed forever. I would, if I can get another bloodline, that'd be great, and I understand with some of the stuff, like you don't have a choice, So my hope is that eventually I can diversify that. The leopard rats, the Citula, for sure. There's definitely other people breeding them in the States, but they are just, I think there's a couple different reasons. There's one of the guys that's breeding them in the States really doesn't have a social media presence. Like he has a Facebook, but he never posts anything. And if you're not out there sharing pictures and getting people interested in them, I think a lot of people just don't even know they exist. A lot of times when I say like, oh, I have leopard rat snakes, people like give me a blank stare. Like, I don't even know what that is. But I think those are climbing in popularity for sure as they're starting to get more noticeable. And then like the Asclepians are for sure getting more popular. Like those are the driving Zamenis force right now. They're really out there. Like, DM Exotics hatched some this year and he sold out, in minutes or something. And there's a couple other people, like I said, there's the guy in Michigan I know that breeds them here every year. And as they start to disperse, you definitely see more and more people recognizing them and breeding them. And it's a crazy thing too, because I feel like the prices are all over the board. They like, you can find them sometimes, like if there's like a $300 difference in pricing on them, and it's all dependent on like who's listing it and all this. And there doesn't seem to be a consistency. So I think maybe that's part of it too. Cause I do see them posted for like kind of higher than I would want to pay for them prices sometimes. So that might be a factor in it as well, as just they're kind of like seen as being a little out of reach in some aspects. It's just not like it's relatively easy to get like a pair of palmetto corn snakes and get in on that game and get going in a couple of years. Whereas like, you have to drop a little bit more to get into like some of the rare colubrids. So I do think there is a kind of a cost.
And then with pricing, when it comes to that, there's also that factor of other people looking at it and saying, well, it's a little suspicious that these are priced so low, but I also don't want to pay for those super expensive ones. So I'm not even going to inquire at all.
Yeah. It's a weird thing where it's like, you're damned if you do, you're damned if you don't. Cause I've actually had someone reach out to me before. Actually, I've had this a couple times. I try to price fairly and competitively and in a way that will move the animal. I'm not the type of, I'm never going to be the type of person that's like, I'm going to put the highest price tag on this and I'm going to sit on it for a year and maybe someone will buy it. I would rather sell it for, you know, what I think the market is actually going to pay for it and move the animal. And I've had people question me before, like, well, what's wrong with it? You know, why are you selling it so cheap? You know, and it's like, I didn't think it was that cheap. I just think it's a reasonable price.
Right.
And I don't know. I think that's it depends on I think the species you're working with too, and the type of people that are in that realm of the hobby. But it's an interesting thing. The price of things has changed a lot in the last couple of years, and it's interesting too because like for the trinket snakes, their prices are very weird. Like I've seen their prices all over the place as well. And like for a while when they were more popular, their prices were really, really significantly less than they would be like at today. So it's a hard game. You know, you'll get someone to be like, well, I saw this for 150 a couple of years ago. And it's like, okay, well, now this is more rare or whatever. So I don't know. I think I got off on a tangent a little bit there.
No, that's fine. And what, if you don't mind me asking, what are you pricing the Helena at? Because I happened to take a look on a certain website today, and I won't even say what it was. And I don't know if they were captive bred or imported, or like I don't know if they were U.S. captive bred animals, I should say. And I saw them, and they were relatively quite a low price that I was like surprised. Like I think around $100.
Oh yeah, that price is gone. I can't even get them at wholesale for that kind of price anymore. Like the last time I saw them on wholesale lists was way more than that. So again, it fluctuates according to how many are in the country, how many are available, and then you're paying for captive hatched versus captive bred and born in the States or out of the States, or you get these people that some of the big companies can buy them from Europe in like 20 lots or whatever, and they get a better price. And so there's a lot of that kind of goes back and forth. I try to price fairly. So I have mine at 200 per trinket. I was like, they're captive bred and born in the States from someone that actually lives
even
here.
That's super fair. I mean, for that
and
animal.
I have a lot of people waiting for them. You know, I have people waiting for these eggs to hatch, so they will probably all be gone within a couple weeks of hatching. Not out of my house, obviously, but I mean, spoken for.
Yeah.
But yeah, that's an interesting factor too. As demand like ebbs and flows, you're going to get higher and lower prices for things. Like I've noticed the Aesculapians is one of the things where like I've been kind of following the prices over the last couple of years, and that has gone up, I think, with the popularity of them.
Okay.
So I've seen ones listed for like $500 or $600 a piece, and I'm like, no, like I'm not. I in my opinion, I'm like that's too much. But
okay. Yeah, it's interesting. You know, with some of these colubrids and valuing, especially because I'm in the ball python realm too, where I see a lot of price variability and volatility as well. So it's like, you know, then you start making things where you're just like, where do I put this at? And you're kind of seeing where the market is. And like, you know, I keep the bamboo rat snakes, the, you know, Porphyricia, and I see cockeye priced all over the place. I'll see some for $350 to $400. Then I'll see other people post them for $200, and I'm just like, I don't know what's going on there. Like I feel like that $300 to $400 range is a real nice sweet spot for that species and something that people are more than willing to pay. But then meanwhile, there are some people posting it for, in my opinion, I think it's too low for the species. But
I agree with you. I dipped my toes in with those guys a while back, a couple of years ago, and I really didn't enjoy working with them. So I ended up moving on from them. That was just my personal. I just didn't like it. And I could not give them away. Like it took forever for me to sell them.
Really?
And I think that some of that might just be like, I'm not known for breeding those species. So maybe they would look at that and be like, well, I'd rather buy them for more from this dude because he breeds them regularly. And that's completely legit and fair. When you build a reputation for being good with a species. But it's a weird, like when I bought mine the first time, like I think I paid $350 or something for my original one.
Yeah.
So, and I think that's a fair price. I think that's probably where they should be for being as rare and as beautiful. But yeah, the prices on that stuff just fluctuate wildly. And people that price them too low, I think do hurt some of that too. Cause then you get the guys that go like, well, I'm going to wait for this one guy to sell them for $150 or whatever. It's just fussy. I feel like every species is a little bit different with that and the kind of people that are watching it. So it's one of those things where you really have to kind of be in tune with your audience. You have to, like, I talk to a lot of people and they're frustrated because like sales are down or whatever. And it's like, okay, well, maybe your animals are not priced appropriately in accordance to the market currently. Like if it's not matching the demand, then you're never going to get this $2,500 price tag that you want. Like maybe it was worth that 10 years ago, but.
And especially right now with the way the economy is and just in a weird market in general, people are a little strapped, but like they still want snakes. They just don't want to pay those high price tags that, we saw in 2020 to 2022. I just think it's different.
I agree with you. I think it's a lot different. I definitely have felt the shift myself with some of the stuff I work with. And, it's a difference of like, sometimes even just offering to do a payment plan, you're at least getting a sale instead of being a hard ass and being like, I don't take payment plans. I think that ultimately hurts a lot of people, especially when you're dealing with like higher dollar end, animals.
Yeah, I'm super open to payment plans. I did have one occasion where I didn't specifically define how. It was the first time I was doing it as a seller. I didn't specifically define how I wanted it to go in terms of like, hey, you should pay me this day, this day, this day. Right. And then wound up going almost the whole payment plan and backed out. And then I kept the very tiny deposit I got. Yep. And I was like, okay. And then I had someone line up for me, which was good, who also did a payment plan, but we defined it. And I wound up being able to move that animal still. But yeah, it's just
I can bite you
there. So tip for everyone, make sure if you're going to do payment plans, have really set definitions of how you're going to do it.
Yeah.
And really make it a plan.
I've learned the hard way. So because I breed Solomon Island ground boas, they naturally reproduce in the winter. That's just when they are ready to go. And then they naturally give birth in the fall. So by the time I've got these animals feeding and ready to go, it's almost the cutoff where it's too cold to ship anymore.
Right.
And in the years past, I've ended up in these situations where I'm doing payment plans that go through the winter. And it's hard because you want to be like, okay, it needs to be paid off in 30 days. But then they go, okay, but you can't ship it until it's warm enough again. Why can't I have that time to pay it off? And so it becomes this like, it's a weird, it's a tough thing to navigate. You really have to lay it out in a head. Like, I know that I'm technically having to hold this until the weather is warm, but like, I don't want a payment plan to drag on 2.5 months or whatever. I think at that point it's just silly. Yep. And you get this, like, there's an excitement level of when you buy a new snake and it gets shipped out the next week and you're like really into it and you rip open the box and it's so exciting. And I have seen this happen before where people will get into a payment plan and then it's through the winter, like 2 to 3 months, and they're like not interested anymore. And I have had this, like, a couple instances where people have just like backed out because they didn't want it anymore or whatever. And I'm like, okay, well, you're not getting your deposit back. Like, I don't know what you expect was going to happen here. So that stuff for a while, to be honest with you, made me, I don't know, feel a little bit bitter in that regard, to to doing that and entertaining that like overwinter hold. So it's tough. You have to play that like balancing act of like, how long is too long of a payment plan? Like, I've done things to try to like circumvent that, and like breeding earlier in the year if I can, trying to get them to drop earlier, things like that. But having that set, like, you have to have this paid by this time,
right?
And,
And then sometimes it's just hard to avoid that natural cycle of the animal, and
Yeah.
it you know, you could
Yeah.
put all your efforts in, but in the end, you know, it's still winding up kind of in the same spot, right?
Right, and the tough thing is about them, like, in the case of those guys, they'll drop, like last year over winter, I ended up sitting on like 70 babies
Oh
because they
wow.
dropped so many babies. And so they all had names on their tubs of people who had paid for them, but I couldn't ship them. So guess what? I'm feeding hundreds of dollars of
Yeah.
feeders over the winter, taking care of these, changing their water dishes, and it just burns you out a little bit. Um, in my case, it did. I had so many of them, and it just was very draining. And so that stuff becomes kind of it's hard to not put that like negative spin on when someone goes, "Hey, can I have a payment plan?" So that's just it's part of the game.
Yeah.
You just have to you have to have a good mindset about it. You have to have good established communication. You have to have set standards of what you want out of somebody.
Yeah.
I
Hey,
don't
but
know.
it sounds pretty good on your end if you're able to sell that many animals before they're ready to ship. I mean,
Yeah.
that must feel pretty good as well.
Oh yeah, absolutely. I have hundreds of people on my waiting list for my Candoya.
Wow.
So, and I can never satisfy every person. I haven't been able to do that every year. It just grows. So,
Yeah.
I'll be like, oh, I got these 50 people off my list, and then 150, 200 more have signed up in the last couple of months or whatever. So,
Okay.
Candoya are on the rise if that's something you're looking at. But
Okay.
yeah,
Cool. No, and now that we're kind of talking about it, let's kind of get into some of your other species. I know you have a
sure.
pretty diverse group of other stuff. So if you kind of want to go down the list and talk about each one a little bit, go right ahead.
Sure. I mainly specialize at the moment in Candoya. That's really what most people, I think, know me for and follow me
Okay.
for. I probably 80% of the people that follow me on Instagram are following for the Candoya stuff. I
Right.
breed the Pulsoni and then the subspecies Pulsoni tasmai. So I mainly focus on those two. Those two species make up probably half of my collection easily.
Gotcha.
And they're definitely a passion species for me, a passion project. They've been a lot of very time consuming, but very like the payoff has been great for learning about them, learning what they need,
Okay.
how to breed them, how to start them. So it's definitely a learning curve. There's not a lot of good, solid information out there. So a lot of my information has been reading scientific papers and then reading them again and then digging deeper and spending time on iNaturalist and things like that. So
Gotcha.
and I have curated a collection that I'm pretty proud of at the moment. I have a lot of different color varieties and some animals I'm really proud to have. But those are like I definitely they take up quite a bit of my time for sure. Especially baby season
Okay.
is quite intense. I very intentionally had a light breeding season this year, so I knew I was only going to have a couple litters at most. Because the year before that was just too much. It was overwhelming. I had like 120 babies born of just the Pulsoni, and
Wow.
that's a lot.
Yeah.
And they come out super super tiny. So it's just a lot of husbandry and a lot of learning what actually works for them and how to get them started and how to get them established and things like that. And those are some of my holdbacks. Those are some of my favorite ones from last year. I've been trying
Nice.
to curate. I think I'm one of the only people in the States that are currently raising up like third and fourth generation of these guys now to
Okay.
breed them and to produce, fifth and sixth generation in a couple years. And because that's really my goal is to line breed for certain traits. I'm, like
Yeah.
ones that are good feeders right away. I'm holding those ones back, and ones that have the patterning I like, I'm holding those back. So,
Right.
other than that, though, we didn't even talk about those guys. I have the Oxyropus.
Okay.
But yeah,
Yeah,
I have
I
those guys.
totally I just saw this. I had to click on it because I was like,
Oh
oh.
yeah, those are a really neat species. I got my pair from Stan Grumbeck, who
Okay.
has very few of them himself. They're extremely difficult to get your hands on, and I definitely paid through the nose for them.
Okay.
I'm not gonna lie, but they're very cool. They're very laid back. You basically can't make these animals bite you. which I think is really cool out of a smaller colubrid like that.
Nice.
They're just fascinating. They go through a color change as they grow too, so they get more colorful as they grow. Like she's turning more gold, and then like some of them turn like pumpkin orange and stuff. So there's some like really cool variation just within that species. My pair is probably still easily a year out from breeding though, because they kind of they're slow growers for sure. But they're like 2021s, I think, or something. I don't remember what. I think they're 2021s. But yeah, they definitely grow super slow. But I keep them very similar to like how you'd set up a corn snake. Again, I offer the humid hide, but I never ever see them in it. Like very, very rarely. They don't utilize it really. That's one of my Tasmai babies.
Nice.
So I also keep emerald tree boas. I keep Woma pythons. Yeah, I have 7 emeralds right now.
Very nice.
I'm kind of always going back and forth on like, do I need more of these or not? Like, kind of like,
they're cool.
Yeah, not enough people are working with the northerns in a serious fashion, like to actually try to produce them. And there's very few people that are like, I really respect in the hobby that are doing some really cool work with them. I wish there was more. But like my friend Tim Rice, he's really great. I can't remember what his. How is it? I think he goes by Tim. No, Christopher. God, Christopher Rice. Sorry about that, Chris, if you listen. So Christopher Rice, his spirit.
Yeah, spirit.
Snake. I don't remember. You know what I'm talking about. Okay, like
I know who it is. Yeah.
So more people need to be doing that because these guys really deserve to be taken more seriously. It's just so wild to me that like they've been in the hobby for how many years and we still don't have like. You can't go on Morph Market and just find captive bred and born emeralds.
Yeah.
Like every once in a while you'll see them, but they really are not common still. So it's one of those like I've always had a passion for them. Like I said, that was my first snake, was an emerald tree boa. So I'm at the point now where I'm just like, all right, I'm going to do it. I'm going to get some going and we'll just see what happens. Like it's definitely more of a side project next to like the Candoya for sure. But
very cool.
They're just fascinating, beautiful animals.
And I saw those nice cages behind you too.
Yeah.
I assume they're all in there.
Yeah, those are all emeralds. And then there's a Woma on the bottom of that stack, I think, on the very bottom, this side. But I've got a bunch of adult cages out in my sunroom right now that I'm like preparing to move in here, and this whole thing is getting rearranged with bigger cages. And I have so many grow outs right now. I feel like I'm in this horrible transition year where everything's getting upgraded. Like this is all empty behind me right here because everything's moved to bigger enclosures. And I'm building stuff out from like their baby tubs to bigger tubs, and then the bigger tubs to cages. And I do transitioning like that to keep things moving and to keep things feeling safe and secure. I have some massive 6-foot enclosures out there that you can't see for my Woma pythons and stuff. So
yeah, so I was going to ask in general, like you're keeping, I do see a lot of racks in the background. Is it mostly rack keeping with the exception of like the emeralds and like Womas and stuff?
I have a weird, like I said, right now my collection is very much in flux. I have a lot of animals that are still growing and are not prepared for adult setups. Right. So this year I've got all these cages out in the sunroom. I've got other ones on order right now. So things are transitioning. Some of the stuff is going to stay in tubs, just huge, giant tubs. It just depends on their needs. Like the Candoya do not thrive as well in big enclosures. You can certainly make it work, but I have found that for breeding purposes and for parturition purposes and things like that, they really appreciate their privacy. And that's not to say I'm cramming them in tiny boxes. They have tons of space. I special ordered this gigantic $3,000 huge tub rack system for my Candoya. They look so small in this space. You know, that's what I want. That's what I'm about, is giving them enrichment, giving them lots of opportunities to have different areas to hang out in. And every species is different. Their needs are all different. So I try to respect that and to cater to their needs. So if I'm finding that like something's just not working, like I will try another way. I will put it in a terrarium, or I'll put it in a rack, or whatever they need to be successful. And I think there's a lot of that that's kind of lost in the hobby right now. There's a lot of like demonizing different styles of keeping, and like I'm not about that. Like, you know your animal, you should know your animal. If you're in tune with your animal, you know what they need. And so many people put aesthetic above that. And I don't want to go off on a tangent on it or anything, but I definitely try to find a balance between both. You know, I'm trying to find what works for the species, won't work for the species. One of my things, like with my sand boas, most big breeders of sand boas, you see them keep them in like, I don't even know what the quart is, but they're like, you know, very small tubs, and they live out their whole lives in like kind of a small contained area. There are some sand boa breeders that actually keep them in tubs so small that they can't even stretch out of the way, so they're just curled around the box. But in my opinion, that's gross. I think I don't agree with that.
Okay.
They should at least be able to stretch out, you know? Yeah. So I have been working on making sure that none of my animals are cramped in that way. And that's just something that I think is personally important for the animals I'm keeping. You see better body tone, you see better feeding habits, breeding habits, all that kind of stuff I think is improved as long as you do it correctly. And that's, again, going back to like husbandry differences, I think that gets lost a lot, and people will be like so caught up on the like, oh, they need an 8-foot tall enclosure or something, but then the snake freaks out because they're not feeling secure enough. So again, I'm going off on a tangent about that, but a lot of my collection is in flux right now. I've got all these transitions happening, people being upgraded and moving around and stuff. So what's behind me is like probably not even going to be behind me next time. We're redoing those windows back there, and it's the whole thing. So, nice. But that stuff's exciting. It's nice to be able to be in a place where like I can give those things to the animals, because I think that they do deserve to have the best I can give them, and that they will utilize and be happy in. So, did I answer your question?
Yes, definitely. Cool. And going off to the womas a little bit, I was just scrolling through. It looks like you did produce some, and I know Aspidites are kind of on that list of like kind of harder species to produce.
Yeah, they're a pain in the ass.
Yeah. So what was that like, being able to hatch? Is that your first time breeding them, or have you done it before?
I've produced them. That was my third season, I guess. Nice. Okay. Yeah, and it's Woma pythons are tough because they need a big enough space to be happy. Otherwise, they do a lot of like nose rubbing and things like that. So then you've also got to be able to give them a temperature drop. They have a seasonal change that they need, or they don't tend to breed as well. So you have to cool them. And generally I do a period of breeding that's like, so in like November, I start cooling them down, and then I don't raise the temps up again until like February. And they're together that whole time, that whole span of time. And they will breed and breed and breed through the cool down period. And it's important to have them in there during that time, or she won't ovulate and then produce eggs later. So you let them breed for that whole period. I have found that the longer I keep them together, the better number of viable eggs I get out of them. So that like 3 to 4 month period is pretty on the mark for like what you should be doing. And I feed them super heavily before the cool down too, because you don't feed them during that time. Most of them won't even eat. You know, they totally turn off later in the year a lot of the times anyway. Like my male right now, my biggest breeding male right now is already kind of like, he's like hunting for a female. He's doing a lot of like roaming and looking around and exploring. And I can tell when he's getting like antsy, his feeding response slows way down. And then what you do is you wait until you see the female starting to look swollen. There will just be a point toward the end where you're like, okay, wow, she looks really big. And that's when you can kind of take the male out. You start raising the temperatures again back to normal. Usually they go into shed right after that, and in like 30 days they lay their eggs.
Interesting.
It's weird. I had one year where she shed, and I was like, here come the eggs, and no eggs came. And then 4 weeks later, she went into another shed, and then she laid her eggs. So I was just like, what are you doing? I don't know. But they're funny that way. And my big female absolutely bitterly refuses to use a nest box. Like, absolutely not. She's not interested. She pushes it out of the way. I've tried like putting them next to each other, like with different holes she could go in and out, and she just shoves them aside and lays on the floor, which is so annoying to get the Woma eggs off of the floor of a cage, because they adhere to it. But it's the eggs that are the problem. Getting the egg to hatch into a baby, that's the issue. And that is, I think, what stops Womas from being more popular. The hatch rate versus death rate of the eggs is very intense, especially if you are, all it takes is like a couple drips on the eggs to basically kill them.
Really? Okay.
My last season, this last year, was really, it was a rough one because I had a really great clutch from her. I think it was like, she laid 8 eggs. They were all great, and only 2 hatched. Every other one died, and it was because it sucked too, because they all looked beautiful and perfect. I was like, oh man, I'm killing it this year. These are awesome. And then underneath, they were all like, there was like this red fungus that just killed them all. And it was one of those things where, like, you don't want to pick up the eggs and turn them over every day and mess with them and stuff. That's, messing with them too much isn't good either. But so I'm going to be changing my incubation method again this year. Like the first 2 years, I was pretty successful. I hatched most of the eggs both years. And then this last year was like just a disaster, where it was like, why do I even deal with these? But they're amazing animals. And if you can nail that down, I think the advice that I took just didn't work for my incubation style or something. I don't know what happened exactly, but I'm going to try a different method this year. It's this guy that he's like 100% hatch rate. You'll never have problems again. And if that's the case, like, all right, I will be happy to discuss that too. Because again, I feel like sometimes people like are so secretive about like how they have their success, which just isn't fair to the rest of the hobby. I've just never understood that mindset. But they're amazing. Yeah. They're amazing babies. They start super well as long as you have them set up properly. They all have always started for me on frozen thawed feeders, like with no hesitation. And I will either use quail or mice to start. And I try to feed more birds and lean meats like rabbits and stuff like that to my Womas in general. But hatching the eggs is like, that's the drawback to Womas, period, in my opinion.
Gotcha. Okay.
Yeah. But
cool. All right. So that kind of covers a lot of the rest of your species. So that's super awesome, because one thing I see about, and I know colubrids aren't your main thing, but one thing I kind of realize about people who like colubrids is that they usually have a diverse collection.
Yeah, for sure.
Whether it's species wise or, jumping over to the other realms of the hobby, like boas and pythons and stuff like that, and lizards sometimes, and you have that background. So with the monitors and stuff. So
right. It's super interesting cool. Too, because I really started with boas, and I always told myself I'm not getting back into species that have eggs. I'm not doing it. I'm not incubating eggs. And here I am. So it happens.
Gotcha.
They pulled me in.
Cool. All right. Kind of getting into some of my wrap-up questions here. The reptile industry, I feel like there's been, and maybe I don't know, I feel like there's been a lot of negativity in the reptile world over the last couple of years, especially with what's going on in the world in general and stuff. From our conversation, it seems like you've been doing quite well and have been quite successful, but like, what's a big motivator for what really keeps you going with the reptiles?
There's just some mystery to it that I appreciate, and I've gone back and forth on this too, as like why I'm so into them. I just find them kind of fascinating in their behaviors and learning about the different ways they reproduce and grow and different color changes they go through. Despite all the like the negativity in the hobby and stuff like that, the things that draw me back are like just how fascinating they can be.
Right.
And again, I think maybe that's what draws me to like the lesser kept species, like with my Candoya and the emeralds and things like that, where like, it doesn't make up a majority of people's collections for the most part.
Yeah.
It's just I've always been one to like look for a challenge, and sometimes that hurts me in that way too, because it can be stressful and hard to kind of work around how to figure those things out, especially if there's not really anyone that can mentor you. And that can be valuable in a hobby like this, where if there's really no one pioneering it or no one's really worked with these species, it can be kind of a challenge. And part of what I have really enjoyed is sharing the things that I have learned, to help other people get going as well, with like, especially with the Candoya. Like, I answer questions all day long, every day. There has been very few days that I have not received a new message. Hey, Christen, can you give me advice on this thing with Candoya or whatever? So I do a lot of that, to the point where like I have written up, I have like a link tree that you can go to, where I have like all my information that I've put together on like how to keep them. And so I think that educational value, I've always been kind of drawn to that as well, that like learning and helping to share it with other people. Back in the day, I used to do like educational programs. I would take snakes into schools, and we would do like, this is where the snake comes from, and to try to do that kind of stuff, outreach programs or whatever. I think that's one of the big draws for me, to be honest with you.
Okay. Awesome. Yeah, I think the education and showing people, what it's all about is super important. It's a super big piece.
I think they get missed a lot.
Yeah. And that's why I do this show, to bring more awareness to species that, people don't hear about all the time.
Yeah.
So.
Yeah. And it's awesome.
Cool. All right. And then what would you say? So if you had to put, like, let's say in the next 3 to 5 years, what does the future hold for Stygian Exotics? Are there any species additions of the future you plan on? Is it kind of just to keep the train rolling where it is type of deal? What do you have in mind?
It's funny because this is the first time in a long time where I felt like, I think I have everything that I'm desperate to have. Like, I think I have curated the collection that I've wanted to have for a while. And I know that sounds kind of like cheesy or whatever, but like, how sometimes you just like, this didn't work out for me, or, I didn't really like this so much. And I think I'm really finally in a place that like, okay, I've found these species that I connect with, that I have a genuine interest with, and that, other people have a genuine interest with as well. They're species that I can keep well, that I can do well with. I will be the first person to admit that like I have had species before where I was like, yeah, I'm going to do this. I'm going to breed them and be successful. And then I got them and I was like, oh, wow. I don't enjoy keeping this species, or they're harder than I thought because nobody has them, or, maybe the information out there isn't accurate, or it's not the whole story.
Right.
It's interesting because now I feel like a collection that like I feel proud of. I feel happy to talk about them. There's nothing where I'm like, oh yeah, I kind of have this too, whatever. And holding back generations and raising up other generations that I have produced and will add to the hobby. Like, I think that's really cool. That's where a lot of my focus is right now. Like I said, I'm holding back like 3rd, 4th generations of Candoya to raise up, to breed, and to continue to line breed stuff. Just being able to do that is really kind of where I see the next couple of years, panning out. Really nailing down a couple projects that I'm working on. But I don't really foresee expanding very much or doing any more species. There might, like, I have interests, everyone always has that, like, I still do like to look at this. But for the most part, I'm pretty set. I think I'm pretty happy. If anyone has, I was gonna say, if anyone has any free silver Savu pythons, like that would be my only real. But no,
Nice.
seriously, I think I'm pretty happy with it. So
Awesome. Yeah, no, I mean, I feel like that's not an answer most people will give. I mean, I know I could say personally, like, I love the collection I've built, but I also still feel that like I'm not satisfied. Like the
oh
job's not
yeah.
done yet, in my
Oh yeah.
opinion.
Oh, for sure.
Um, so I don't know. But it's awesome that, you think that you've, really built this solid collection, and it seems that way as well. It seems like you have
Yeah.
some fantastic animals you're working with. But yeah,
Thank you.
and it's probably just because I'm a newer keeper and don't have those continuous generations the way you do. So I think any newer keeper is gonna feel that, they're always gonna be hungry for
Right.
the next opportunity, the next thing.
And I went through quite a few years of that where I was like, am I interested in this thing too? I really think I am, and sometimes you find out the hard way. Like
Yeah,
I had viper boas for a couple years, and I don't know if you're familiar with those at all. But
I know what they are. Not super
okay,
though.
I hate them. I hate keeping them. I can't, I'm not ashamed to admit that out loud. I was for a while. It was kind of like, oh, well, they just weren't for me. I hated having them here. Um, they poop and pee in their water dish almost every day. They're nasty. They're smelly. They bite. They're hard to keep clean. There was a lot of reasons, but for me, I was like, man, those are just not my cup of tea. I'm just not into this experience. It was like keeping
Okay,
a much smaller blood python that's meaner. Like I don't know how to
gotcha.
explain it. They're very weird things. They're beautiful, amazing snakes, and some people are amazing with them and have these cool setups and are really doing like awesome work with them. And they definitely deserve a place in the hobby, but not in my house. And I'm not afraid to admit that. I think there's such a sense of shame with some keepers of like, oh, they don't want to admit that like they couldn't cut it or they couldn't do this or that. Like
Right.
if something doesn't work for me, I'm not going to sit on it and be miserable keeping it, because then you're not giving it your 100% either, right?
Yeah.
Like there's the potential to
Yeah.
be like, I don't really like these, and maybe you're not giving them enough focus. Like I don't think that's fair to the animals either. So like I've gotten like I had someone comment like a while ago that like felt like I had changed a couple projects too much or something like that. And I was like, okay, well, F you, you're not here in my house understanding what's happening here either.
Yeah.
I have valid reasons for the transformations I've taken over the years.
Of course.
Yeah, maybe I was interested in viper boas at one point. I'm not anymore. I had my fill of them. They were not fun in my opinion. So there's things like that where like I think that too many people are secretive and weird about that kind of stuff. Like I know people change snake hands or change snakes to different hands all the time. It's part of the
Right.
hobby.
Yeah.
People get into ball pythons and they get out of them. People get into whatever, and it's one of those things where like you get so much shame for like those posts were like, oh, I had to give my dog up because I lost my house and we're living on the street. And then you get those people that are like, oh, how dare you do that? And well, it's like, okay, but the dog wasn't getting fed regularly, wasn't getting vet attention anymore. So there's a weird sense of shame in the hobby about those kinds of things, which I don't support that. I don't agree with it.
Yeah.
And it's not like I was like it, you've said you've gonna have the hunger to explore more species and stuff. And I think with any keeper, that's important too. You're learning new things and you're keeping new animals. You're like getting more experiences. Oh man, I didn't expect this would handle this way or eat this way, or the challenges that would come with that. And like as a hobby, how are we expected to grow if we can't have some forgiveness for that? So
Exactly.
that's my opinion.
Cool. Yeah. I could roll with that. Awesome. And then kind of my last final wrap-up question, going all the way back to colubrids now, because it is colubrid corruption. So what would you say to someone who is looking to get into either the Coelognathus or the Zamensis? What's kind of your elevator pitch? Someone who maybe they're brand new in the hobby, maybe they've kept snakes before and they just have never had an experience with a colubrid or those in particular.
I think with the trinket snakes in particular, I think they make such amazing, personable, inquisitive snakes that like you can't go wrong with them. Where the hobby generally says like, a corn snake is a perfect starter set, and the ball python is the perfect starter, and they're great starters as well. But like, man, those trinket snakes, the Helena particularly, like they only get like 3 feet long. They're super personable. They're inquisitive. They eat amazingly. You can do a beautiful, amazing setup with these animals and not break the bank, and like so much of the hobby, like the pet side of the hobby, loves being able to set up like a grand terrarium and plants and all this stuff. And like a snake like that is going to thrive in that setup,
Yep.
That would be a big pitch for them. I think that they are, as far as colubrid goes, like, in my opinion, you couldn't ask for better. I would say like maybe their one real drawback is you can't get albino and stripe and this and that. Like it just doesn't exist. There's albinos over in Europe somewhere, but we don't have them here.
Okay.
But like other than that, you can't go wrong. They're not even bitey. They're not really even flighty. You can basically scoop them out of their cage and they're just like, okay, and they hang out with you. Really, that's like over all of the other colubrids I keep, even like those are the best handlers, best eaters, everything.
Awesome. Hell yeah. All right. Well, this has been a fantastic hour and 45 minutes. Christen, thank you so much for joining. Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah. Thanks so much for joining. I really appreciate it. There's been a bunch of people in the live chat and a bunch of people who are going to watch later. So what do you have to say to everyone who's watching or will watch later?
Enjoy it. Hopefully this answered a lot of questions. If you have other questions, please don't hesitate to reach out to me. I love to talk about snakes. I'm not one of those breeders that'll just like ignore you for 2 days and give you a 1-word answer. I'll be at Tinley and I'll be wearing a Stygian Exotics shirt. So if you see me there, feel free to pull me aside and I'll chat with you about whatever, and anyone going to Colubrid Fest, have fun. I really tried to make it happen this year and I was like, it just didn't pan out. So
dang.
But enjoy your colubrids.
Yeah, I've been saying, for anyone who's listening, I plan on taking a lot of video footage of the show. So hopefully you guys, it'll be all on YouTube. So hopefully a bunch of you who aren't able to attend watch it and will expect some good stuff for next year. And obviously this is year 1, so I'm sure there's going to be some growing pains and stuff, but it's going to be a fantastic expo.
I'm super jealous of everybody going. So
yeah. All right. Well, I'm going to throw you backstage if you want to hang out for like 2 minutes while I do the outro, and we'll talk quickly after.
Sounds good.
All right. Thanks.
Good night, guys.
All right, guys, what another great episode of the Colubrid Corruption podcast. I hope you all enjoyed. Thank you to everyone who's in the live chats tonight. If you're watching the replay or you're listening on the, on other platforms, come to YouTube, hit that like button, hit that subscribe. Feel free to leave a review also on the podcasting apps. That helps us out. Hopefully gets it out to other reptile people. We want other people to get corrupted too, right? So let's get some more listeners listening. For everyone going to Colubrid Fest, again, I can't wait to meet you all. Please don't be shy. Come up and say hi to me. I may not know your face, but just introduce yourself, your name, and your, like business name and whatever. Please. I'm going to have a table, so you're going to get to talk to me there. At the talks, I'm giving a talk talking about the future, like being a young person and the future of the hobby. So it's going to be really fun. But yeah, that's pretty much it. I have that long drive on Thursday, or starting Thursday, and driving all the way up. So that should be real interesting. But I can't wait for it. But yeah, guys, again, this was episode number 38 of the Colubrid Corruption podcast with Christen of Stygian Exotics. Hope you all enjoyed. And we will see you guys probably in a couple weeks, because I'm not doing an episode next week because of Colubrid Fest. So peace out. Catch you on the next one.